Good evening, good evening, good evening. Once again, I'm just so thankful to be here in the house of the Lord, giving honor and glory to Jesus who's the head of my life, and giving all honor and praise to the bishop even for allowing me to be here one more time to do a Bible study with you. Tonight we're going to be going through the Book of Esther. I'm not asking you to read the whole book because we're going to be dealing with certain features of this book, and it's going to be a man who could be king. But we're on first, before we do anything, before we even try to get to the kingdom, let's go to God in prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you once again, Lord, for your kindness, your mercy, your grace. We thank you for having your hand around and about us and just for guiding us as we go through the way. We ask now that your spirit just meld with our spirit, Lord. Just bring us high into your word, that we can hear the word, we can see the word, we can do the word, and even be the word. Lord, just help us tonight to understand what you have in store for each and every one of us. Bless those who are sick, those who are, Lord, who are sitting behind in some of the bills and some other things that are worrying them right now. Just cleanse the mind and just ease them, Lord, that they might be able to hear what you have to say unto them. I thank you now for just allowing me to even be, just to be in your presence. In Jesus' name, I just thank you. Amen, amen, amen. As we go for tonight, we're going through the Book of Esther. I know everybody has a way of seeing and looking at it in a different manner, but tonight we're going to be dealing with Mordecai. Not about Esther so much as it is about Mordecai. Esther is an instrumental part of this book. This book was written way back, right after the Babylonians released all of the Jews to go home. They were released in 536. Ahasuerus was to reign from 487 to 465. He had a 21-year reign ahead of him. But these are the Jews that didn't go back home. This was a remnant of the Jews that were still stuck in one place. And if you want to know where the place was, it was called Shushan. It was in Elam. Elam was a part of Persia. Persia now is where Iran is. So you have a whole lot of territory taken up there. From Shushan, the capital of Elam, to Babylon, it was approximately 350 miles. And from Babylon back to the Jewish settlements on the other side, it was approximately another 700 some miles. So we're talking about 1,000 miles away from their homeland. And these are the ones that chose not to go back. But we're talking about a man who was reigning with them, King Ahasuerus. I'm going to get it right. Xerxes. Let me just go with that name. His official name was Xerxes, after his first forefather, Ahasuerus. I got to get this thing right. I'll go with Xerxes. But anyway, we're talking about the principal figures of the king, Esther, and we're talking about Mordecai. Mordecai was a descendant of Saul down through the ranks and ages. They were taken away to Babylon. So in the first reading of the book, the first 3 verses, it was something that sort of puzzled me there. So it's in there, but I'm going to leave it where it is. The first 3 verses of chapter 1 in Esther reads, "Now it came to pass in the days of Ahasuerus, that is Ahasuerus, which reigned from India even unto Ethiopia, over 107 and 20 provinces." Now, to show you that the territory was not a small territory, India to Ethiopia, how many people are we talking about in that region of the world right now? We're talking about billions. So we have a lot of people that he's in reign over, 127 provinces. That went from India to Ethiopia. It went all over the Persian kingdom at that time, including which was Persia. So that in those days when the king Ahasuerus, I'm just going to leave that, sat on the throne of his kingdom, which was in Shushan the palace, in the 3rd year of his reign, he made a feast unto all his princesses and his servants. The power of Persia and Media the nobles and princesses of the province being before him. In the 3rd year of his reign, a little history I had to back up and do. The 3rd year of his reign came because he was trying to wage war with Greece. They were trying to overthrow the Greek population, and it failed. So he's about like 3.5 years now, and he's back home. So what does he do when he get home? He wants to throw a party to show how much he's accomplished. Even though he was beaten back by the Greeks, he wants to show how much he accomplished. So he's having a party of all parties. He's showing his land and his wealth and everything to the people that are coming from around the province to show them how great he is. Now, it didn't take a minute to do that. It took 6 months. Now, it says in here that he was going to throw a party, but it didn't say the party lasted 6 months and 1 week. The party lasted for a week. But during that time, while he was showing people around and everything else, he was busy. He was well taken care of in his likes. But he had wives and a principal wife named Vashti at home. So he had something to come home to after he got defeated. But when he got home, 6 months later, he decided he's going to throw a party. He didn't care how much the people drank. He didn't care about any of this. But while they were there drinking, he wants to show off the queen. I'm not going to go through the story of Esther all the way, but he wants to show off the queen. And she rejects him. Just flat, plain and simple. She rejects him. She's the head wife of the whole group, but she rejects him. So now you got the principal wife rejecting him. Then, with all rulers, he had a thing going on that he had a group of people would get in his ear, so to speak, tell him what he needed to hear. They suggested he go out and have them find other brides to be in the queen's place. This is where Esther comes in. Even though this is not going to be totally about Esther, this is where Esther comes in. Esther was a niece. Actually, she was a cousin of Mordecai. Mordecai was a Jew. They had different names now since they've been with these people almost 80 years after leaving Babylon. They have not left. They're still in their home places. Over these 400 years, they have made friends, they made acquaintances, they made everything. So this young lady blends right in with the group that's there. She must have been a good-looking woman because they hurried up and picked her, and the king hurried up, sought her out to be in his group. So you got to admit, you can't tell one race from the other these days. You can't tell one color from the other unless you know who your kinfolk are. They are all kinfolk, but nobody knows who they are. Even the king, he's a descendant from out of Esau. If you go all the way back, Esau split off because he wanted to have his own country. He was going to be a great man. That was his party, so to speak. But anyway, to get Esther into the house is where we get the story of Esther. And from there, everybody has a different take on it. But we all know that back in those days, the king didn't allow just to have somebody come into his place, take over. They had to go through a process. Life is a process, whether we like it or not. We can't go out and rule something unless we know for sure that we can own it, that we can look at it and do what we need to do. But as we get to Esther, her Persian name comes from a god of the Greeks, Ishtar. So her Persian name was Esther. Her Jewish name was Hadassah. After she was picked to go into this house, nobody knew who she was kin to because they didn't keep up with them in that manner. Unless you knew who your kinfolk were, the people surrounding you did not know who you really were. But only one person knew who she was, and that was Mordecai. That was the cousin who had raised her. After Abihail and her father had been killed, he took her as his daughter. Even today, that still goes on, that people take other folks' daughters and children and raise them as their own, and they still love them just as much as if they were their own. So this is where we get in with Mordecai. It's not about how much he did for her or how much he didn't do for her. It was just that she was into the house now of the king. Well, we get down to verse 2 and chapter 2 and verse 5, and we'll sort of explain that as we go. Now in Shushan the palace there was a certain Jew, whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, the son of Semi, the son of Kish, a Benjaminite. So he's of the Judean family. Only 2 families went north, the other 10 went to the south. So he's of the Judean family, out of Judah, who had been carried away. And this verse sort of gets me, I'm just going to read it, but not really taken into account. It says, verse 6 says, who had been carried away from Jerusalem with the captivity, which had been carried away with Jeconiah, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had carried away. We're talking 400 years ago, 450 years ago. It's not like this, everybody thinks in the books, and I heard it Sunday when pastor was preaching, that time seems to go, not preaching, but was telling that time seems to go so fast, everybody thinks the Bible and things are written in 2 or 3 weeks. This is not so. This is going to be a period of 10 years that we're talking. This is after 14 years that before she even gets into the princess's house. Actually, 7 years before she gets into the princess's house. Well, only other thing wrong with that is now that they've got a Benjaminite in there, he was carried away with his family. Let me take that back. His family was carried away with him, and his family has thrived out in Persia. You know they had to thrive because anywhere we go now, we need people that need jobs. We need food. We need clothing. So if you're sitting in a king's place and they haven't abused you or mistreated you, you're going to thrive. You're going to eat. You're going to be doing well unless you have a dictator on your hands. This is where the love comes in for this family. So one thing about this story, God is not mentioned in it, but you can see his works throughout the whole story as it is covered. It is not about everybody being of the Jewish faith saying this God this and this God that. They didn't even do that. They lived harmoniously with these people. So imagine you got people that are taking care of the concubines and the main wife and the house and the grounds. You got people in every province that has Jews among them that are living harmoniously right now. But it's always a kink in the story. No matter how good you are and how good God is to you, it's always a kink in the story. So it came to pass, verse 7, and he brought up Hadassah, that is Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she had neither father nor mother, and the maid was fair and beautiful, whom Mordecai, when her father and mother were dead, took for his own daughter. As I just explained, that one it's not what you're doing, it's who you're doing it for. That was love of family. It's a gift that's given to each and every one of us if we so choose to use it. So as Esther was in that house and he walked back and forth, eventually after a year of being groomed, Esther was taken into the king's house. This was in the 7th year of the reign of King Ahasuerus. So we got a whole thing going here now. We got a family that's finding love. The king has a keen eye. He loves what he's looking at, the lady he's looking at. His uncle has been in love with this young lady ever since he raised her. So this is love, love, and love. But all things don't go well for everybody. In verse 220, it said, Esther had not yet showed her kindred nor her people, as Mordecai had charged her. For Esther did the commandment of Mordecai, just as when she was brought up with him. Now, exceptionally well, you don't go out and tell people who you are if there's no reason for it. Why would I tell you I'm rich so you can rob me tonight? Why would I tell you I own everything so you can come and break it up and take it from me whenever you feel up to it? So you don't tell everybody everything. And being a Jew in a Greek neighborhood, you didn't tell those folks what to do. And you had people around you who were enemies from the time of your forefathers up until now. They would be glad to kill you, to get rid of you. So she told nobody. Verse 2, 20, chapter 2, verse 21. In those days, while Mordecai sat in the king's gate, two of the king's chamberlains, Bigthan and Teresh, of those which kept the door, were wroth, and sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. Always somebody who wants to get rid of you, whether you work for you or not. It's not about how good you are. It's about what they think of you at that time. Problem is, you got people sitting around. And verse 22 says, and the thing was known to Mordecai. Now, Mordecai got an in with the palace now. And it was told to Esther, the queen. And Esther certified it to the king. So how much closer can you get to the king's ear than telling the queen, whom you personally know, whom you've raised, that she can get the message to the king? And the thing was known to Mordecai, was told Esther the queen, and Esther certified the king thereof in Mordecai's name. And when inquisition was made of the matter, it was found out, therefore they were both hanged on a tree. And it was written in the book of Chronicles. Remember that verse. It's always written somewhere in the king's house for the king's benefit and for the people that's coming behind him. What happened? Chronicles is so full of names and places, dates and things. It would take a good studious guy a good 2 months just to sit down and actually go through this. It's not about how fast you go through it. It's how much you can understand of it. So is it not written in the Chronicles? Well, now it's time for the devil to raise his head. We've got love in action. We've got a lot of love in action. Verse 3. Verse 3. Why am I saying verse? Lord, thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Jesus. Chapter 3, verse 1 and 2. After these things, the king Ahasuerus promote Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, and advanced him, and set his seat above all the princes that were with him. And all the king's servants that were in the king's gate bowed and revered Haman, for the king had so commanded concerning him. Notice the king commanded it. But Mordecai bowed not, nor did him reverence. Jewish people in those days didn't bow down to other people of low standing or even their standing. They only bowed down to God in respect. Out of all respect that you can give anything, the highest respect was paid to God. You're going to be hearing things about sackcloth and everything else. This is an indication that God is definitely in this book. They did not bow down to their level of people. They did not bow down to the kings. They did everything possible to stay away from trying to have somebody to praise, to bless, because they knew what God could do for them. Verse 6 in chapter 3. Mordecai, after he found out Haman would not bow down to him, and he thought scorn to lay hands on Mordecai alone, for they had showed him the people of Mordecai. Wherefore Haman sought to destroy all the Jews that were throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus, even the people of Mordecai. Now, to give you a little indication of how long Mordecai has been around, to the taking away of the Jews back in the day, there was a Mordecai that went with them in that beginning. Before Ezra, there was a group that Mordecai had that went with him. So I'm going to leave that one. But the next verse down is going to be verse 8. And Haman said unto King Ahasuerus, there is a certain people scattered abroad and dispersed among the people in all the provinces of thy kingdom, and their laws are diverse from all people. Neither keep they the king's laws. Therefore it is not for the king's profit to suffer them. Here's a man that's just been promoted by the king, and he's trying to do everything he can to get rid of his enemies, the Jews. The problem is, he's talking to the wrong person. He's talking to the right person if he wants to inflict damage, but he's talking to the wrong person who's in love. Remember, this chapter is about love, love, and more love. Sometimes you have to have a little hate thrown in. This is where the hate comes in. He can't let go of old customs. People can't learn to live together because he wants to destroy all the Jews. One thing about Haman, he didn't get up off what he was doing. He stayed with it because he thought that was the way to go. He's the chief second-hand man. Why can't he do these things? He's got his hands in everything, the treasury, he's into the population, into the laws. He's into everything. He's a second-hand man. So King didn't listen too well, I don't think, because sometimes you want to make an action, but you already got people that are not messing with you. They're not bothering you. They're not hurting you. They've been interspersed in this section for 500 years almost. They're not hurting anybody. They're living. They're growing. Of course, then you have to watch out for the growth problem. As Pharaoh found out, they grow too fast. But as they were going, they sent out letters. Verse 13 in chapter 3, and I want to infer to y'all right now, just in fear, not interfere, that this was the best postal system in the world back in the day. It might sound bad because we got telephones, we got computers, we got everything today. We can get the word out across the world in a matter of minutes. Back then, 127 provinces, you want to write letters, you had to have a way to deal with it. They had the best route in the world. They had horses, camels. They had everything, donkeys. They had people waiting on horses like the Wells Fargo thing used to be. Every so many miles, they would pick up the mail and run. So it didn't take long to get to Shushan, even though that's still quite a few miles away. Didn't take long. Verse 15 tell you up front, the post went out, being hastened by the king's commandment, and the decree was given in Shushan the palace. And the king and Haman sat down to drink. But the city of Shushan was perplexed. These are people living not in fear, but living in harmony with all that's been going on for 500 years. And what do we have now? We got a bug in the soup, so to speak. He's going to make it a little bit rough on people because he wants to be the head honcho. And everything, when you want to be the head, you have to know who your players are. He didn't know who the players were. Now, remember Mordecai. Queen Esther is in the house now. She's already promoted Mordecai to sit at the king's gate. Now, you can't get more prominent than that. These are the people who watch over and watch anything that's coming and going at all times. They get to know well, let's put it like this. If they have any snitches in the group, they got them under control too. They got the whole thing going. They know exactly who to put in place to get the word out or to get the word in. Verse 1 in chapter 4 says, when Mordecai perceived all that was done, this is where the Jewish custom come in reverence in God. Mordecai rent his clothes and put on sackcloth with ashes and went out into the midst of the city and cried with a loud and bitter cry. Now, the one thing you don't want to see, and I was saying, you don't want to see a crying man. There's nothing pretty about that. To put on sackcloth and ashes to show your disapproval of something, it definitely can't be pretty. Nobody will want to be around him, but remember, this is a guy that knows exactly what he's doing. This is a God-given trait in him. God is at work. He's saying, if you're going to revere me, do it as you did in your old will. Put on the sackcloth, pray, fast, do all the things that reverence God so he can reverence you. And chapter 4 and 3, it says, and in every providence, this is God is at work now, whatsoever the king's commandment and his decrees came, there was great mourning among the Jews, fasting, weeping, wailing, and many lay in sackcloth and ashes. Now, I have to admit that if God is not working, then nobody is. Because if you see that many people laying around, you know what tribe they're from, you know what group they're from, and you know they're not just seeking God just for nothing. They're seeking him for something great. Nobody knows about this yet but Mordecai. So what Mordecai do? Chapter 4:13 said Mordecai commanded to answer Esther. This is after he'd already sent word by Hattach to Esther, and they're going back and forth. And this is where everybody gets this story all entangled. They love this part of the story, but this part of the story is a breakdown to Mordecai, how he's still proposing and doing things unseen. He's the underdog in the fight, so to speak. But you got to watch the underdog sometimes. They have a bite bigger than you think. Then Mordecai commanded to answer Esther, think not with thyself that thou shalt escape the king's houses more than all the Jews. That was a statement to make to let somebody know you should know where you are right now. You know you're in the king's house. You know you're still Jewish. It hasn't changed your birthright. You're still Jewish. Do you not think that the king, after he signed a decree to slay and kill all Jews, men, women, and children, it didn't matter, not to the decree that Haman had set up, do you not think that it would not come from you, you the first one in the house? Verse 14, for if thou altogether holdest thy peace at this time, remember this verse, if thou altogether holdest thy peace at this time, then there shall be enlargement and deliverance arise to the Jews from another place. What place is that? Who can save the Jews? Who's always been saving the Jews? Who's always looked out for their welfare? That's enlargement. That's another place. He still had his belief in God. It won't be mentioned, but he still has his place in God's hands. But thou and thy father's house shall be destroyed once they find out that you are Jewish. And it says, but thou and thy father's house shall be destroyed. And who knoweth whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this? God's hand at work. Haman is trying to destroy. God is trying to rebuild. He's got people in place. The works is going forth. Whether we like it or not, or whether they like it or not, it's going forth. And so Esther sends the answer back, and I like this. After 3 or 4 days of back and forth with Mordecai, she sends the answer back in verse 16. Said, go gather together all the Jews that are present at Shushan, and fast ye for me, and neither eat nor drink 3 days, night or day. Is that not Jewish religious orders? Eating, fasting, praying, 3 days, not just 1 day, 3 days. I also and my maidens will fast likewise. So will I go in unto the king, which is not according to the law. And if I perish, I perish. That comes after, if you know the law of the Jewish people back in those days, and the Greeks and the Romans that were in those days, anybody going in to see the king unannounced could be killed by his orders. Not by anybody else's, but by the king's orders. So when it comes to Esther in this part, and I heard it preached and taught, Esther is following Mordecai's lead as to what the Jews should do. She's got her faith rebuilt in her now. She was taught well, really taught well. I'm going to see the king, and if I perish, I perish. It would be no more than if you didn't go to see the king, they waged war on everybody in Shushan and all the provinces, she would still be killed because she is a Jew. This is where love comes back to the forefront. I don't care what people do. Sometimes you just can't touch love. Love is that thing that's going to be with you, around you, and for you at all times. So we got to Esther. Now she goes to see the king. She makes her request. What is your request? Well, I'd rather not say it this time, but I would love to throw you a party. So if we can get you and Hammond to come to the party, we'll be fine. I can make my request known. He's already told her he'd give her anything she needed, up to half of the kingdom. But you're talking about saving a people there, not just the kingdom. Kingdoms can be replaced. People, they don't come back. Once they're gone, they're gone. So, just to read out one verse. Right after that, verse 9 in chapter 5. Then went Haman forth that day, joyful and with a glad heart. He's been invited by the princes to come to a party. You can't invite anybody any higher than the king's second in command. If he was loyal to the king, he would have been the perfect man to be there. But you always have to have a show out of some kind. But when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, that he stood not up, nor moved for him, he was full of indignation against Mordecai. Love, hate, love. The love is still there. Hate keeps rearing its ugly head. It's not about liking the person that he's looking at. He hates him now because Mordecai has already told him he's a Jew. He's made it known that he was a Jew. Otherwise, he wouldn't be out there in sackcloth and crying and laying on the ground and looking ugly, so to speak. He's a Jew. He's doing a Jewish custom. Haman can't stand it because he still won't get up and bow down to him. How many people in this world today want somebody to bow down to them just because of who they are? It's not because of what they've done for the people. It's because of who they are, who they think they are. So we have Haman now. This is where he comes and get himself together. He's mad with the whole world. He's mad with the whole group. So what does he do? Chapter 6:1 say, on that night could not the king sleep, and he commanded to bring the book of records and of the chronicles, and they were read before the king. Funny thing about books, you can read them today, put them down, think about something that's in them, go back next week, next month, next year, pick up that book and you get a whole new insight. The Bible is so like that. You can get a whole new insight of everything. So the king can't sleep. You don't think this is God working? He's not letting them sleep. You've got a problem in front of you, and the way to get you to solve it is to keep you up and keep you on your toes. You're going to have to do something. So he was already asking, what had been done for the man that tried to save me? Nobody could tell him my answer. So what does he do? He gets the Chronicles read to him. And it was found written in verse 2 that Mordecai had told of Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's chamberlains, the keepers of the door, who sought to lay hand on King Ahasuerus. And the king said, what honor and dignity have been done? Honor and dignity. Think of those words. Have been done to Mordecai for this. Then said the king's servants that ministered to him, there is nothing done for him. He's a Jew guy. I mean, what you going to do for him? He already told you who he is. What you going to do for him? But this goes to show how God works. This is being said in front of Haman coming there full of it, full of himself. I've got a decree out. I'm going to kill everybody in sight, especially the Jewish people. This is an insult to him to come in and hear him talking about Mordecai, the Jew, what has been done to him. I love it because when you said things, what goes around comes around, those things can come back to bite you quickly, very quickly. So Haman shows up. The king asks who's outside in the courtyard, but not knowing that he's coming into a conversation that he shouldn't have any parts of, the king bids him in. And the king said, who is in the court? Now Haman was coming to the outward court of the king's house to speak unto the king, to hang Mordecai on the gallows that he had prepared for him. In his haste, being picked second in command. This is not all happening in a week, folks. He's went home, told his wife and family about all this. They had a gallows built. That thing was 75 feet high. Anybody remember the movie, and I know most of you do, Hang 'em High with Clint Eastwood, and I was an old movie, it was a good movie. They didn't hang them that high in those days. They found the lowest tree branch they could get and just put a rope around the neck and let it go. This man had a thing built 75 feet high. Surely if you don't break your neck with the rope, you will break your neck falling to the ground. He wanted him dead. This is no other. He hated him so much, he wanted him dead. But the king is in here talking, and up comes Haman. So after he asked him to come in, before Haman could open his mouth, he asks him real nice, what have we done for Mordecai? Let's go to verse 6 in chapter 6. And the king said unto him, what shall be done unto the man whom the king delighteth to honor? Oh man, this is a good off take here. Now Haman thought in his heart, to whom the king delight to do honor more than myself. His head swole up because the king said that. All at once he knows he's the man that the king is going to honor. He's the second in command. He's got a decree going out to slay the Jews. He's done everything in his power to get rid of the Jewish population. Now remember, Jewish people were still growing at that time. What was promised to Abraham? That they have so many descendants to be as the stars in the night. No man has counted them yet that I know of. They don't even try to speculate. Sands of the sea. No man has counted those that I know of, and they're still growing. So he thought in his heart that the king is going to honor him because he's brought this plan to him of these people that's in this court in his house that he can't stand. But what he didn't know is the king had been getting along very well with these people. What he didn't know as of yet was that his wife was one of them. But we're going to find that out, because when things try to go your way and you think to do dirt to somebody, remember the same dirt you dig out that hole may be the dirt that they throw back in your face. So he asked Haman for a suggestion on what to do, and Haman decided to tell him, get out the royal apparel, get out the horses, ride him around his city, put a crown on his head, clothe him in purple. Do all the things that would honor this man. The king just said, okay, we'll make it so. But we're going to need somebody to parade him around. Now, when he said parade him around, he don't mean just around the block as they do in parades out here. You got to remember, back in those days, the streets are wide. They're long. The city is built inside that city is built. Shushan, the palace, was not just a baby place. You had people on top of people on top of people. Take the man through the streets and say, this is how the king would like to honor the man that has helped him. So Haman was chosen to do that work. Being second in command, you do as the king asks. If you didn't, you were all afraid on the spot. It didn't take much. So Haman did that for Mordecai. He had not yet gotten the words out that he wanted to hang him. And what happens to him is he's parading Mordecai around as a prince, as a king, as a giant in his own world. So he goes home and he tells his wife, this is why you got to watch this love-hate relationship. He loved his family. He could talk about them constantly. Nice family, 10 boys, and at that time boys and a lot of relatives were good for the family. But now he's going home telling them, I thought he was going to honor me. I thought I was going to be the one. But at that reception, she told on me. She told on me. He's sitting there telling them now, I thought I was going to be the one. His wife tell him, if you're going up against the Jewish population from what they know and what's been around, you're not going to win. Just that simple. You're not going to win. So what we have now, we have a man that's disgusted, broke, bitter. He still hates the Jews, and he has no place to go. He has no place to go. So Esther invited the king and Haman to the party after that was over because she wanted to honor the king, and she also wanted to make her requests known. She'd already said if she perished, she perished, but she wants to make her requests known. So the first time around they go in, he asks, what is your petition? She tells him, you get half of everything he owns. Verse 7 says, then Esther the queen answered and said, if I have found favor in thy sight, O king, and if it please the king, let my life be given me at my petition. And this is a surprise, and my people at my request. Nobody knew Esther was Jewish. That didn't bother the king. The king was in love. That didn't bother him a bit. He probably was happy to hear it. He didn't get one of the common folks. He got somebody from another place. For we are sold, verse 4 says, for we are sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be slain, and to perish. But if we had been sold for bondmen and bondwomen, I had held my tongue. If they sold us off to be slaves, I would have been fine with that. We would still be alive. We would be thriving some way, enjoying life. Even if it might have been a little harder, we could still have been alive and enjoying it. But we've been sold out to be destroyed, to perish. And although the enemy could not countervail the king's damage, she couldn't hold her tongue. She had to tell the king about what was going on. And you got to remember, the things go in the air, they don't come back down unless they fall down. Where does it fall? What is your petition? What is your request? My petition is, I want me and my people to live. My request is, if life means anything to you, then you would just counterattack these people with everything they put out on the air through that mail system that I was talking about. You would send out a letter to shut that down. But that was forthcoming. But here we are. The king's love started showing up. I wouldn't write on that of anything. But verse 5 shows you how much in love this king was. And that's not on the paper, but this shows you just how much he was. The king answered and said unto Esther the queen, who is he? First thing is first. You just told me you're a Jewish person. Now, my question is, who is he? Where is he? That durst presume in his heart to do so. He's not going to kill my queen, not the person I'm in love with. This is not going to happen. And Esther said, the adversary and enemy is this wicked Haman. Now, if that don't get your juices stirred up, if that don't get your heart racing and your mind boggled down, nothing will. You standing there while the queen is saying, this guy right here is the guy that's messing up everybody. He's messing up a whole population. Been thriving, living in peace since people been going back for almost 80 years and they're going home. We haven't left to go home. We're still in peace. I've become the queen. This is in a matter of like 7 years. I've become the queen. Still got about 14 years to reign. Here it is 3-4 years later. Haman is trying to interfere, mess everything up. He's trying to mess everything. This is the 12th year that he's reigning now. Haman is trying to mess it up. So, the king, instead of just getting all upset with everybody, he goes out and he thinks this thing over. Comes back and he asks, who is it? Why is it? What it is? He goes out to think on it, and nothing but Haman to do but try to appease the queen is to fall all over the queen trying to beg for his life because he knows once his name is out there, he's done. So, when the king come back in verse 8, it says, when the king returned out of the palace garden and into the palace of wine, they were sitting around drinking, and Haman had fallen upon the bed whereupon Esther was. One thing about men folk in that day, you couldn't be near the queen. That's why he had eunuchs to deliver the women in the household. They couldn't have males in the household. Then said the king, will he force the queen also before me in the house? And the word was sent, as the word went out of the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. Haman he just made a mess of himself. He came in to say one thing, to do another. He came back in at the request the second time because he thought he was important, only to find out that he was the one that messed up everything. And now he gets the honor of being hanged on his own gallows. There's some things in life we shouldn't wish for. One of the things is never wish harm to anybody else. If it can be worked out, let God work that out. On that day, verses 8 and 1, verses 8, chapter 8 and 1, on that day did the king Ahasuerus give the house of Haman to the Jews' enemy unto Esther the queen. This man loved this woman. He wasn't about to give up on her. He gave her everything that Haman had. And Mordecai came before the king, for Esther had told what he was unto her. That broke the camel's back. When they say the straw that broke the camel's back, that broke the camel's back. And the king took off his ring, which he had taken from Haman, and gave it unto Mordecai. This man has been faithful in everything he's done, so why not? And Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman. Now, I'm not going to go into all the other stuff. We knows what happened after that. We had some people we had to get rid of. As they asked him to write a letter to reverse the stuff that was supposed to have been done to the Jews, the killing and the pillage, the king said, I can't do that. But I will give you opportunity to write the letters and will sign anything you write. And this was unto Mordecai that they could do it. So they wrote. And they wrote the king's name. They sealed it with the king's ring. And they sent letters by horseback. That postal system that we're still talking about. There's mules, camels, young dromedaries, which is young camels. And the king granted the Jews to gather themselves together. This is his decree for the Jews. He still loved these people because he has found no fault in them. I can't take back what I said, but get yourselves together until that day. And if you need to, do what you have to do to defend yourself. Now, I don't know about you, but if somebody gives me a upfront invitation to get rid of my enemies and I know I can with no harm set for me, it's going to be done. It is definitely going to be done. So what does the Jewish people do? They know about, since Mordecai was there to hear it, they know about what day this is going to happen. But in those days, they had to plan for months ahead. It wasn't like they planned it today, did it next week, or yesterday and did it today. They had to plan ahead. So those letters that were sent out were out there to the Greek population, but also the letters that were sent out went to the Jewish people. Now, I wouldn't send my enemy a letter telling them what I'm going to do. So you send it to your people. It wasn't like everybody went to the post office and they could pick up a flyer and see what was going on. It went to the Jewish people by name. They didn't miss anything. One thing about Mordecai, he was into this for the long haul. It wasn't about him being there for part of it or for the last half of it. And Mordecai got this letter sent out. Every province, every city, the king's name was on everything. And that day that was coming to them was going to be full of joy and gladness because they are going to get an opportunity to avenge themselves. You be in custody of somebody else for 400 years. You've only been living not free, but almost as bondservant and bondwomen and bondmen to the king because the king controlled everything. Wouldn't you be joyful if he tell you you can get rid of your enemies? You don't have an enemy around you? Verse 8, Lord Roger, I'm going to stop and pray, Lord. Thank you. Chapter 8, 17. And in every province and every city, wheresoever the king's commandment and his decree came, the Jews, didn't say that the Greeks now, the Jews had joy and gladness, a feast and a good day, because they did what they had to do. They protected themselves. Now, to show you how this thing has strengthened out, when the Jews got word of it, and the people around them started looking around, we have more of them than we have of us. It wasn't taken till you had to go and pillage the place and bring back the goods and bring back the servants. You didn't do any of that. They went out, as opposed to what the Greeks would have. They went out and they just got rid of the ones that hated them. The people that were going to war against them, they got a surprise. When they came out of their houses, they got a surprise. You've got Jews all over the place that's taking care of the business. And even in Shushan, the capital, you've got 300 men dead right there so far. In the capital. The king is sitting there. These are his people. But more than anything, the Jews are his people. He punished Mordecai not for anything, but he did punish Haman for wanting to put his hands on the Jews. He wanted to destroy them. The king is still, I wouldn't say he's over one way or the other. He's still a level-headed person, still running the country. And he's allowing things to happen so we can get peace back in this country. You can't have peace if you got people going at each other day in and day out. Verse 3 in chapter 9 says, and all the rulers of the province, and the lieutenants, and the deputies, and the officers of the king helped the Jews. Think about being in a high command in the king's army. You know these folks are coming for you. You've gotten word that they're destroying everything. You're not going to be sitting there waiting for them to come get me. I'm going out and join you. You don't like so-and-so? Let me go out there and join you. I can live another day. I can live. I can go out and just live. And they did this because of the fear of Mordecai fell upon them. Mordecai was enhanced. He was a ruler, a great ruler, second to the king. For Mordecai was great in the king's house, and his fame went out throughout all the provinces. For this man Mordecai waxed greater and greater. Every time something happened and the Jewish people came out on top, the fame of Mordecai got higher, higher, and higher. He might not have been as well known to some of the other nations around him, but in those 127 provinces, which is all of Persia, he was well known. They knew who he was. They didn't have to question it. So now we come down to this thing of Pur. Pur was where the Greeks cast lots on what day they would do such and such. So when that was taken away from them by the insurrection of the Jews jumping all over them, the Jews, in verse 22 in chapter 9, it said, the Jews, wherein the Jews rested from their enemies, and the month was turned into them from sorrow to joy, and from mourning into a good day, that they should make them days of feasting and joy, and of sending portions one to another, and gifts to the poor. This is Purim. This is Purim. And the Jews undertook to do as they had begun, and as Mordecai had written unto them. Because Haman the Methodite, the Agagite, the enemy of all the Jews, had devised against the Jews to destroy them, and had cast Pur. That is, the lot to consume them and to destroy them. But they didn't do it. So Esther the queen and Mordecai the Jew rewrote another rule. If you go down to verse 29, you see 29 and 32. They rewrote another rule, that they would have Purim. This is going to be their holidays they would observe perpetually, for all time. The letters were sent to all the Jews, and then Esther decreed and confirmed the matters of Purim. And it was all written in the book. One thing I can say about those folks, they wrote everything down, so they have a record, a very acute record, a very accurate record. Now, chapter 10 is the part that I really love. 10 and 1, it's not on that paper, but, and the king, Ahasuerus, laid a tribute upon the land and upon the isles of the sea. Well, a tribute could be anything from a eulogy to gifts, to money, to grain. It could be like when it was back in the land, when Joseph was back in the land of Egypt, when he gave out the wheat and the grain and the stuff. That could be a tribute in the sense of speaking, but the king showed his gratitude to the people for being at peace. He probably sent gifts or food, mostly food in that day. And all acts of his power and of his might, and the declaration of greatness of Mordecai, whereunto the king advanced him, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Media and Persia? Media and Persia, that's a wide range, folks. That's about a couple of 1,000 miles around if you go a round trip. For Mordecai the Jew was next unto King Ahasuerus, and great among the Jews, and accepted of the multitude of his brethren, seeking the wealth of his people and seeking peace for all his people. You have a man that is sucking to the king. There's nothing in there that says he couldn't be king. If anything happened to the king, who do you think would take it up? That would be a Jew stepping into the place of a king that's had control over them for years and years. But they were living peaceful until one guy decided to break the love bond between each and every person in that place, in that providence, and mess it all up. Haman started out to work a wonder for himself, wound up getting himself put away because of it. Love is universal.